After the death of his eldest daughter, a millionaire throws himself into work and distances himself from his own home. One day, arriving home unexpectedly, he caught the stepmother burning the stepdaughter's belongings, while his youngest daughter cried in tears, begging, "Please, it's all that's left of her." What the man did next left her trembling in shock. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and tell us which city you're watching from. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of the Hampton estate, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Charlotte Hampton stood in the backyard, her small hands trembling as she watched flames consume everything she had left of her sister. The fire crackled and hissed, devouring photographs, clothes, notebooks, and toys with merciless efficiency. Victoria, her stepmother, stood nearby with an expression of cold detachment, her designer sunglasses reflecting the orange glow of the fire. She held a metal poker in one hand, occasionally prodding the burning items to ensure complete destruction. Charlotte's voice broke through the silence, desperate and pleading. "Please stop. It's all I have left of her." The 11-year-old girl rushed forward, trying to grab a stuffed rabbit from the edge of the flames, but Victoria's hand shot out, gripping her wrist firmly. "Charlotte, don't be dramatic. This is necessary," Victoria said, her tone measured and clinical. "We need to move forward, and keeping all these reminders around isn't healthy for anyone." Tears streamed down Charlotte's face as she watched her sister's favorite sweater curl and blacken in the heat. "But these are Madison's things. You can't just burn them like they're nothing." Victoria released the girl's wrist and turned back to the fire, tossing in another armful of items. "Your sister is gone, Charlotte. Holding on to material possessions won't bring her back. I'm doing what's best for this family." At that precise moment, the sound of tires on gravel interrupted them. A sleek black Mercedes pulled into the side driveway, and Richard Hampton emerged, briefcase in hand. He had planned to go straight to his home office, as he had done every day for the past 6 months. But something made him pause. The smell of smoke reached him first. Then he heard his daughter's voice, choked with sobs. Richard walked around the corner of the house and stopped dead in his tracks. The scene before him seemed surreal. Charlotte stood with her face buried in her hands, shoulders, shaking with grief. Victoria calmly fed more items into the flames, her movements methodical and unhurried. Between them, a pile of his late daughter's belongings turned to ash. Richard's briefcase slipped from his fingers, hitting the ground with a dull thud. Victoria turned at the sound, her expression shifting instantly to one of practiced concern. "Richard, darling, you're home early." He couldn't speak. His eyes moved from the fire to Charlotte's tear-stained face, then back to his wife. "What is this?" Victoria stepped away from the flames, brushing ash from her hands. "I was just organizing Madison's room. Charlotte got upset, but I explained that we need to create space for healing. The therapist said that removing triggers could help with the grieving process." "The therapist said what?" Richard's voice was barely above a whisper. "Dr. Morrison recommended that we consider removing some of the more painful reminders," Victoria continued smoothly. "I thought it would be easier to do this while Charlotte was supposed to be at her piano lesson, but she came home early." Charlotte looked up at her father, her eyes red and swollen. "Dad, she's burning everything. Madison's diary, her photos, even the bracelet Grandma gave her. I tried to stop her, but she wouldn't listen." Richard felt something shift inside him. For 6 months he had buried himself in work, attending board meetings and closing deals while his family fell apart. He had trusted Victoria to handle things at home, to take care of Charlotte, to manage the household. Now, standing in his backyard watching his daughter's memories turn to smoke, he realized how blind he had been. "Victoria, put out the fire," he said quietly. His wife's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. "Richard, I really think this is for the best. Charlotte is becoming obsessed with Madison. It's not healthy for a child her age to be so fixated on the past." "I said put it out." His voice was firmer now, carrying the authority he used in boardrooms. Victoria's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. "Fine. If you think it's better to let her wallow in grief, that's your decision." She turned to Charlotte with a look that seemed sympathetic to anyone who didn't know better. I'm sorry, sweetheart, I was only trying to help. Richard moved to his daughter's side, placing a hand on her shoulder. Charlotte immediately pressed against him, something she hadn't done in months. The contact made his chest ache with guilt. As Victoria walked toward the house, her heels clicking sharply on the stone pathway, Richard knelt beside the dying fire. Most of the items were already destroyed, but he could make out the charred remains of a photo album, the melted plastic of what might have been a jewelry box, and the scorched corner of a notebook. "I'm sorry, Dad," Charlotte whispered. "I should have stopped her sooner." Richard pulled his daughter close, feeling the weight of his failures pressing down on him. "No, sweetheart. I'm the one who should be sorry. I should have been here." That evening, the Hampton household was wrapped in tense silence. Victoria had retreated to the master bedroom, claiming a headache. Richard sat in his study, staring at a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. Charlotte was supposed to be in bed, but he could hear her moving around upstairs. His mind kept replaying the scene in the backyard. Something about Victoria's explanation didn't sit right with him. Dr. Morrison had never mentioned removing Madison's belongings. In fact, the therapist had specifically said that Charlotte should be allowed to process her grief at her own pace. A soft knock on the study door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in." Charlotte entered, clutching something to her chest. She looked small and vulnerable in her pajamas, her blonde hair still damp from the shower. "Can't sleep?" Richard asked gently. She shook her head and approached his desk. "Dad, I need to show you something. I've been scared to tell you, but after today, I think you need to know." Richard sat up straighter, giving her his full attention. "What is it, honey?" Charlotte placed a small notebook on the desk. It was singed around the edges, and the cover was partially melted, but it was intact. "I saved this from the fire. It's Madison's journal. Well, one of them. She had another one that Victoria burned, but I found this one hidden in her room last week." Richard picked up the notebook carefully, as if it might disintegrate in his hands. "Charlotte, if this is private—" "Madison would want you to read it," Charlotte interrupted. "Please, Dad. There are things in there about Victoria. Things that Madison was worried about." He opened the journal to a random page. Madison's familiar handwriting filled the lines, and seeing it made his throat constrict with emotion. He had been avoiding anything that reminded him too directly of his eldest daughter, but now he forced himself to read. The entry was dated 3 weeks before the incident. "Victoria was in Dad's office again today, going through his files. When I asked what she was doing, she got really angry. She said I should mind my own business and stop spying on her, but I wasn't spying. I just wanted to ask if she'd seen my chemistry textbook. She's been acting strange lately, always on her phone, always whispering. I tried to tell Dad, but he's never home anymore. I feel like something bad is going to happen and I don't know how to stop it." Richard's hands shook as he turned the page. Another entry, dated a week later. "I heard Victoria on the phone last night. She was talking about money, about how much the estate is worth. She didn't know I was in the hallway. When she saw me, she hung up really fast and asked how long I'd been standing there. I'm scared of her. I know that sounds crazy, but there's something wrong. I need to talk to Dad, but he's in Singapore for another week. I'm going to write everything down just in case something happens to me." The words blurred as Richard's eyes filled with tears. He looked up at Charlotte, who was watching him with an expression far too serious for an 11-year-old. "There's more," she said quietly. "A lot more." Madison was keeping track of things. She even recorded some conversations on her phone, but Victoria took it after the incident. She said it was broken and had to be thrown away. Richard closed the journal and stood up, walking to the window. Outside, the backyard was dark, but he could still smell the lingering scent of smoke. His mind was racing, connecting dots he had refused to see before. Madison's fall down the stairs had been ruled an accident. The medical examiner found nothing suspicious. The police closed the case within days. Richard had been too devastated to question any of it, and Victoria had handled all the arrangements with quiet efficiency. But now, reading his daughter's words, he felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. "Charlotte, I need you to tell me." "Everything?" he said, turning back to face her. "Everything you've noticed, everything that seemed strange. Can you do that?" She nodded, relief flooding her features. "I've been keeping my own notes. I was afraid you wouldn't believe me, that you'd think I was just being mean to Victoria because she's not my real mum." Richard crossed the room and knelt in front of his daughter, taking her hands in his. "I believe you, and I'm sorry I haven't been paying attention. That changes now, I promise." For the first time in months, Charlotte smiled. It was a small, tentative thing, but it gave Richard hope. "There's someone else who might be able to help," Charlotte said. "Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper. She's been here since before Victoria came. She sees everything, but she never says anything. I think she's scared too." Richard made a mental note to speak with Mrs. Chen privately. The woman had been with the family for 15 years, and if anyone knew the truth about what happened in this house, it would be her. "Go to bed now, sweetheart," he said, standing up. "And Charlotte, keep that journal somewhere safe, somewhere Victoria won't find it." After his daughter left, Richard sat back down at his desk and opened the journal again. He read through the night, watching the sky gradually lighten outside his window. Each entry painted a picture of a girl who had been afraid, who had seen something wrong but didn't know how to fix it. The final entry was dated the day before the incident. "I found something in Victoria's closet. Papers about Dad's company, about his will. She's been planning something, I know it. I'm going to confront her tomorrow, I have to. If something happens to Dad, Charlotte will be all alone with her, and I can't let that happen. I'm going to tell Dad everything as soon as he gets back from New York. I just hope I'm wrong about all of this. I hope I'm just being paranoid. But if I'm not, if something happens to me, I need someone to know the truth. Victoria is not who she pretends to be." Richard closed the journal and pressed his palms against his eyes. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture he didn't want to see, but could no longer ignore. His daughter had been afraid. She had tried to warn him, and he had been too consumed by work, too trusting of his new wife, too blind to see what was happening in his own home. The question now was what to do about it. He needed evidence, real evidence, not just the worried writings of a teenage girl. He needed to be smart about this, careful. If Victoria was capable of what he was beginning to suspect, then Charlotte was in danger too. Richard picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. Marcus Webb, a private investigator, he had used for corporate matters in the past. It was 5 in the morning, but this couldn't wait. The phone rang 3 times before a groggy voice answered. "Hampton? Do you know what time it is?" "Marcus, I need your help. It's about my family. About Madison." There was a pause, then Marcus's voice came back, alert now. "I'll be there in an hour." Richard ended the call and stood up, walking to the window again. The sun was rising over the Hampton estate, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It should have been beautiful, but all Richard could think about was the fire in the backyard, the ashes of his daughter's memories, and the woman sleeping upstairs who might be responsible for destroying far more than just material possessions. He thought about Charlotte, brave and frightened, keeping secrets because she didn't know who to trust. He thought about Madison, writing in her journal by flashlight, documenting her fears because she knew something was terribly wrong. And he thought about himself, the successful businessman who had everything except what mattered most, the awareness to protect his own children. That was going to change. Starting now, Richard Hampton was going to find out the truth about what happened to Madison. And if Victoria was responsible, if she had hurt his daughter, then he would make sure she faced the consequences. The fire in the backyard had destroyed evidence, but it had also awakened something in Richard that had been dormant for too long. His protective instinct, his determination, his refusal to accept easy answers when something felt wrong. Victoria had made a mistake by burning Madison's things in front of Charlotte. She had revealed herself, shown a crack in her carefully constructed facade. And that crack was all Richard needed to start pulling apart the lies. He picked up Madison's journal and locked it in his desk drawer. Then he went upstairs to check on Charlotte, finding her asleep with her arms wrapped around a pillow. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, making a silent promise to both his daughters. To Madison that he would find out what really happened, and to Charlotte that he would never let anyone hurt her the way her sister had been hurt. The game had changed. Victoria just didn't know it yet. Marcus Webb arrived at the Hampton estate exactly 1 hour after Richard's call. The private investigator was a former FBI agent, with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. Richard met him at the side entrance, away from the main house where Victoria might see them. "Tell me everything," Marcus said, settling into a chair in Richard's study. Richard handed him Madison's journal and spent the next hour explaining what had happened, from his daughter's tragic fall 6 months ago to the fire in the backyard yesterday. Marcus listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a small leather notebook. "I need you to investigate Victoria," Richard concluded. "Her background, her finances, her phone records, everything. And I need you to look into Madison's case again. The medical examiner's report, the police investigation, all of it." Marcus nodded slowly. "Richard, you understand what you're asking me to do? If we find what I think we might find, this is going to get very complicated very quickly." "I don't care about complicated," Richard said firmly. "I care about the truth. My daughter deserves that much." Over the next 2 weeks, Richard maintained a careful facade of normalcy. He went to work, attended dinners with Victoria, and acted as if nothing had changed. But beneath the surface, everything was different. Charlotte became his secret ally. The girl had inherited her father's intelligence and her late mother's intuition. She began documenting everything Victoria did, every phone call, every unexplained absence, every moment of suspicious behavior. Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, finally opened up after Richard assured her that her job was safe regardless of what she revealed. The elderly woman had been terrified of Victoria, but her loyalty to the Hampton family ran deeper than her fear. "I saw them arguing that day," Mrs. Chen confessed, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Miss Madison and Mrs. Victoria at the top of the stairs. I was in the hallway below putting away linens. They were shouting about something, but I couldn't hear what. Then there was a scream, and Miss Madison fell." Richard's blood ran cold. "Why didn't you tell the police?" Mrs. Chen's eyes filled with tears. "Mrs. Victoria found me right after. She said it was a terrible accident, that Miss Madison had tripped. She said if I told anyone we had been arguing, it would only make things worse for the family. She said you were already suffering. Enough, and that bringing up a silly argument would serve no purpose except to cause more pain. I believed her, Mr. Hampton. I thought I was protecting you and Miss Charlotte." Richard reached across and squeezed the housekeeper's hand. "It's not your fault. Victoria manipulated you just like she manipulated all of us." Marcus's investigation began yielding results. Victoria's background was not what she had claimed. Her previous marriage had ended under mysterious circumstances, with her wealthy husband suffering a severe fall that left him incapacitated. She had inherited his entire estate when he passed away 2 years later. The medical examiner who had signed off on Madison's case, Dr. Harrison Mitchell, had received a substantial payment from an offshore account shortly after filing his report. Marcus traced the account back to a shell corporation that Victoria had connections to. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Madison's best friend, Sophie, contacted Charlotte through social media. The girl had been away at boarding school when Madison passed, and she had just learned about the fire in the backyard. "Madison gave me something before I left for school," Sophie told Charlotte over a video call. She said, "It was insurance in case something happened to her. I didn't understand what she meant at the time, but she made me promise to keep it safe." Sophie had a backup of Madison's phone data, including videos and voice recordings that Madison had made in the weeks before her fall. Charlotte immediately told her father, and Marcus arranged to have the data retrieved and analyzed. The recordings were devastating. Madison had installed a hidden camera app on her phone and had captured several conversations with Victoria. In one video taken just days before the incident, Victoria could be heard threatening Madison. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" Victoria's voice was cold and venomous, nothing like the warm tone she used around Richard. "You think your father will believe you over me? I've worked too hard to let some spoiled teenager ruin everything." Madison's voice, shaky but defiant, responded, "I know what you're planning. I found the documents. I know about your first husband, about what really happened to him, and I'm going to tell my dad everything." The video ended abruptly, but it was enough. Marcus took the evidence to a contact in the district attorney's office, someone he trusted to handle the case with discretion. Meanwhile, Victoria was becoming increasingly paranoid. She had noticed Richard's changed behavior, the way he watched her now, the questions he asked that seemed innocent but weren't. She began making plans to leave the country, transferring money to overseas accounts and booking flights under an assumed name. Charlotte discovered the plane tickets while searching Victoria's office. She had become adept at moving through the house unseen, a ghost in her own home gathering evidence piece by piece. "Dad, she's planning to run," Charlotte said, bursting into Richard's study with the printed confirmation email. "She has a flight to the Cayman Islands in 3 days. Richard looked at the paper, then at his daughter's frightened face. "She's not going anywhere. Marcus is meeting with the DA tomorrow. We have enough evidence now." But Victoria was more desperate than they realized. That evening, she approached Charlotte in the girl's bedroom. Her smile was brittle, her eyes calculating. "Charlotte, sweetheart, I think we need to talk," Victoria said, closing the door behind her. "I know you've been upset with me since the fire. I want to make things right between us." Charlotte's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "Okay." Victoria sat on the edge of the bed, her movements slow and deliberate. "I've been thinking that maybe you need some time away, a nice boarding school, like the one Sophie attends. Wouldn't that be wonderful? You could make new friends, have new experiences." "You want to send me away?" Charlotte asked, understanding immediately what Victoria was really saying. "Not send you away, give you opportunities," Victoria corrected, her smile never reaching her eyes. "Your father works so much, and I know you're lonely here. It would be better for everyone." Charlotte stood up, moving toward the door. "I'll think about it." Victoria's hand shot out, gripping Charlotte's arm. "I think you should decide now. In fact, I've already started the application process. You could start next week." The mask had slipped. Charlotte could see the desperation in Victoria's eyes, the barely controlled panic. Her stepmother knew that time was running out, and she wanted Charlotte out of the house before everything came crashing down. "Let go of me," Charlotte said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Not until you understand something," Victoria hissed, pulling Charlotte closer. "Your sister was a nosy, interfering little brat who couldn't mind her own business. Don't make the same mistake she did." The words hung in the air like a confession. Charlotte wrenched her arm free and ran from the room, not stopping until she reached her father's study. Richard was on the phone with Marcus, but he ended the call immediately when he saw his daughter's face. "She threatened me," Charlotte gasped. "She said Madison couldn't mind her own business. Dad, she basically admitted it." Richard pulled out his phone and called Marcus back. "We need to move now, tonight." Within hours, the district attorney had issued a warrant. Police arrived at the Hampton estate just as Victoria was packing her bags. She tried to maintain her composure, insisting there had been some mistake, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the financial transactions, Mrs. Chen's testimony, the medical examiner's bribery, and now her attempt to intimidate Charlotte, all painted a clear picture. Victoria was arrested and charged with multiple crimes related to Madison's case. In custody, faced with the mountain of evidence against her, Victoria's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled. She confessed, though she tried to minimize her actions, claiming everything had been an accident, that she had only pushed Madison in a moment of anger, not meaning for her to fall. But the recordings told a different story. They showed premeditation, planning, and a cold calculation that made Richard's blood run cold. The trial was swift. Victoria was found guilty and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The judge's words echoed in the courtroom. "You betrayed the trust of a family that welcomed you, and you took the life of an innocent girl to protect your own interests. The sentence reflects the severity of your actions and the calculated nature of your crimes." In the aftermath, Richard took a leave of absence from his company. He had spent 6 months running from his grief, and it had nearly cost him his remaining daughter. Now he focused on healing, on being present, on rebuilding what had been broken. Charlotte struggled with nightmares and anxiety, but with therapy and her father's constant support, she slowly began to recover. She started a journal of her own, writing letters to Madison, telling her sister about her days, her thoughts, her healing. One afternoon, 3 months after Victoria's sentencing, a package arrived at the Hampton estate. It was from Sophie, Madison's friend. Inside was a small USB drive with a note. "I found this in the backup files. Madison recorded it the night before she fell. I think you should see it." Richard and Charlotte watched the video together. Madison sat on her bed, her face serious but calm. "Hi, Dad. Hi, Charlotte. If you're watching this, then something happened to me and I need you to know that it wasn't an accident. Victoria is dangerous. I have evidence, recordings, documents, everything you need to prove what she's been planning. But more importantly, I need you both to know that I love you. Dad, stop working so much. Charlotte needs you. Be there for her. And Charlotte, you're stronger than you think. Take care of Dad for me. Don't let grief consume you both. Live your lives, be happy, and remember me with joy, not sadness. I'll always be with you, watching over you both. I love you so much." The video ended, and Richard and Charlotte sat in silence, tears streaming down their faces. But these were different tears, not just of grief, but of love, of connection, of a message from beyond that reminded them of what truly mattered. "She knew," Charlotte whispered. "She knew what might happen, and she still tried to protect us." Richard pulled his daughter close. "She did protect us. She left us the truth, and she reminded us to live. That's what we're going to do, sweetheart. We're going to live, and we're going to make sure her memory is honored." They transformed Madison's bedroom into a small library, just as Charlotte had wanted. They filled it with books, comfortable chairs, and photographs of Madison smiling, laughing, living. They opened it to the community, a place where young people could come to read, study, and find peace. On the main shelf, in a place of honor, sat a single item, Madison's childhood doll, carefully preserved. Inside, hidden where only those who knew would look, was the journal that had started everything, a testament to a brave girl who had fought to protect her family even in the face of danger. The Hampton family had been broken, manipulated, and nearly destroyed. But they had survived. They had found the truth, sought justice, and most importantly, they had found each other again. Richard learned to balance work and family, to be present, to listen. Charlotte grew stronger, her voice more confident, her spirit resilient. Together they built a new life, one that honored Madison's memory while embracing the future. And in the quiet moments, when the afternoon sun filtered through the library windows just right, Charlotte could almost feel her sister's presence, proud and protective, watching over them still.